When these villagers found a book of spells hidden in the attic of an abandoned house, they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. The moment that book was opened, dark forces were unleashed, and it wasn't long before the townspeople started dying in terrifying ways. It all started when Daniel and Thomas, two best friends from the small town of Oakhaven, decided to explore the abandoned Blackwood Manor. This creepy old house had been empty for decades, ever since its last owner mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Locals spoke of strange lights and sounds being heard coming from the house at night, leading many to believe it was haunted. But Daniel and Thomas weren't scared. They wanted to find out if there was any truth to these ghost stories, or if it was all just a bunch of superstitious nonsense. As they crept through the dusty rooms, they could feel their imaginations running wild with every creak of the floorboards and every rustle of the wind outside. Suddenly they heard a noise in the attic, and curiosity got the better of them. As they climbed the creaky ladder and pushed open the trapdoor, they were greeted by a musty smell and complete darkness. They had no choice but to feel their way around until they found a light switch, which flicked on to reveal a dusty trunk in the corner. They pried it open and found a thick leather-bound book filled with strange symbols and incantations. The book was clearly old, but what truly caught their attention were the words written in archaic English. As they delved deeper into the book, they realized it was a grimoire, a book of spells used by witches and warlocks to practice their dark arts. It contained rituals for summoning demons, curses, and hexes, and even recipes for concocting poisonous brews. As they continued reading, they stumbled upon a spell that promised untold power and riches to its caster. And as if it was written just for them, the spell required ingredients that were easily found in nature. Things like nightshade berries, wolfsbane, and the heart of a raven. Daniel, who had always felt overshadowed by his more successful friend, felt a surge of ambition. He saw the opportunity to use the spell to acquire the power and recognition he craved. But Thomas, ever the voice of reason, tried to convince Daniel to do the right thing and return the book to where they found it. However, Daniel wouldn't listen. He was consumed by his own desires and convinced that the spell was merely a fairy tale with no real danger. In a moment of weakness, he agreed to help Daniel, but only under one condition, that they would split the rewards should the spell work. Once the ingredients were gathered, the ritual began. They followed the instructions meticulously, creating a pentagram on the forest floor and chanting the words of power. A thick fog rolled in, obscuring the pentagram and shrouding the clearing in an eerie silence. Then suddenly, the air grew cold, and a guttural voice echoed through the trees. The voice demanded payment for the summoning, and Daniel and Thomas realized they had unleashed something truly evil. The creature emerged from the mist, taking the form of a towering humanoid figure with skin as black as pitch and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. The stench of sulfur filled the air as the demon advanced towards them, its presence radiating pure evil. Panicked, they fled, the demon hot on their heels. They ran through the forest, branches whipping at their faces and twigs snapping under their feet, the sound of their own ragged breathing and the heavy thud of the demon's footsteps echoing through the trees. Finally, they reached the edge of the woods and stumbled out onto the road, collapsing in a heap at the side of the way, hearts pounding and lungs burning. They had escaped the demon, but the horror of what they had unleashed settled over them, heavier than any curse. As the days passed, the townspeople began to die under mysterious circumstances. Old Mrs. Hawthorne was found dead in her garden, her face contorted in a mask of terror. Mr. Harper, the kindly old librarian, collapsed in the middle of the street, his eyes wide with fear, and young Emily Carter was discovered missing, never to be seen again. Daniel and Thomas knew that the deaths were no coincidence, and that the demon had somehow cursed the town. They felt guilty for unleashing this evil, and knew they had to make things right before more lives were lost. But how do you stop a demon who demands payment? And what would it take to lift the curse he had cast over the town? They went back to the Book of Spells in the hopes of finding the answer. And that's when they found it, a counterspell that could banish the demon back to hell. But it came at a terrible price. To cast the counterspell, one of them would have to sacrifice themselves, their life force to banish the demon and lift the curse. Thomas didn't hesitate. Without a word, he began gathering the necessary ingredients for the counterspell, determined to save the town and atone for his part in unleashing the demon. Meanwhile, Daniel was torn. He wanted to save the town, but he also didn't want to die. What good was all the power he had been promised by the demon if he couldn't use it? Unable to bear the weight of his decision, he fled into the forest, desperate for a way out of his predicament. Deep in the woods, he stumbled upon a clearing where a group of witches were gathered around a bonfire. They were beautiful and charismatic, and they welcomed him with open arms, sensing his inner turmoil. They offered him a place among them, promising to help him control the demon he had unleashed. But Daniel knew their intentions were less than pure. These witches were powerful and dangerous, and they wanted the grimoire for themselves. He tried to resist, but they were too strong, and before he knew it, he was bound by magic, forced to watch as they took the book from him. Just as the witches were about to make their escape, Thomas appeared, his face grim and determined. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a bolt of lightning that struck the witches, sending them sprawling to the ground, their beautiful faces twisted in pain. The other villagers, emboldened by Thomas's bravery, rose up against the witches, driving them away and reclaiming their town. But it came at a cost. The demon, sensing the disruption, attacked Thomas, knocking him off his feet and sending him crashing to the ground. With his last bit of strength, Thomas managed to stab the demon with a wooden stake, banishing it back to hell. As the demon vanished, the curse was lifted, and the dead began to stir. They were alive, though weak and confused, and they looked at Thomas with gratitude in their eyes. He had saved them, but at what cost? In the aftermath, the villagers rebuilt their lives, forever changed by their encounter with the supernatural. They honored Thomas's sacrifice, building a statue in his likeness that stood tall in the center of town. But not all was as it seemed. For as the villagers celebrated, a single raven flew overhead, its eyes gleaming red in the sunlight. And in the shadows, a figure watched, his eyes burning with hatred and his mind consumed with thoughts of revenge. The book of spells lay open at his feet, a constant reminder of his thwarted plans and a promise of things to come. And so the story ended, but it could just be beginning. Because what kind of horror story is one witchy book of spells and one banished demon not enough for us? And that's why we've brought you another horror story about a witchy book. And this time it's your classic haunted library story. A librarian was found dead in the stacks. It had been his job to organize and shelve the books, but now his post would need to be filled by someone new. Enter our protagonist, a young woman who'd recently graduated from university. She was excited to start her career as a librarian. Still, she didn't expect to inherit the position due to such a gruesome accident. On her first day, she met the head librarian, a stern-looking woman who gave her a tour of the facility. She was warned to stay away from certain sections, particularly those containing ancient and rare texts. Unnerved but intrigued, she resolved to investigate. After hours, she snuck into the restricted section and discovered a leather-bound journal hidden behind some old scrolls. She knew she shouldn't, but she couldn't resist reading it. The journal entries chronicled the life of a young witch named Agnes, who lived in the town where the library was built. Many years ago, the entries told of her struggles to master her craft, her fear of being discovered, and her forbidden love for a mortal man. The final entry was chilling. It detailed Agnes's plan to bind her soul to the library, assuring her immortality, but trapping her in an endless state of torment. As the young woman read these words, she felt a cold presence at her shoulder. Turning, she saw a ghostly figure standing in the dim light. It was Agnes, her eyes filled with sorrow and despair. The young woman dropped the journal in fright, and as it fell, a single page detached itself and fluttered to the floor. Startled, she watched as the ghost knelt down and began to read the fallen page. With a sudden jolt, the ghost vanished, leaving the young woman trembling in the darkness. The journal now gone, the haunting became more intense. Books flew off shelves, whispers echoed through the stacks, and shadows danced in the corners of her vision. Sleepless and terrified, she resolved to break the curse. She pored over old texts, searching for a way to help Agnes find peace. Finally, she learned of a ritual that could sever the witch's ties to the library, but it came at a terrible price. She would become the new vessel for Agnes's spirit, trapping her own soul in the library alongside the tormented witch. Determined to free the library and its patrons from Agnes's grasp, she performed the ritual. As the words of power left her lips, a wave of energy surged through the room, throwing her to the ground. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of an eternity of torment, she felt a deep sense of peace. Opening her eyes, she saw Agnes standing before her, her expression filled with gratitude. The ghost then faded away, leaving the young woman alone in the silent library. The haunting had stopped. The books returned to their places, and the whispers in the stacks fell silent. She had freed the library and its former caretaker, but at what cost? Now, every time she steps into the library, she feels the presence of Agnes beside her, a constant reminder of the price she paid for peace. And so the story ends, but not without a lingering chill. For in the quietest moments, when the stacks are silent and the whispers grow faint, she can almost hear the echo of Agnes's voice. A gentle reminder that some doors are best left unopened and some secrets are best left buried.